my birthday's October 1st and his is October 7th. And I sent him an email like, happy birthday. And he emailed me back like, oh yeah, it was a great time, like drinking piss in the warm desert, like just, trying to be funny and keep it light, but still like this sucks. Hi, my name is Melissa Ketchel. I'm here to talk about my brother, Mike Hanks. He was in the Marine Corps from 2001 until he was killed in action in Fallujah in November of 2004. We grew up in the country in Michigan, kind of in a rural area. With my parents were married. My dad ended up going to prison when I was maybe 13, so Michael was 10, and it kind of changed the trajectory of our lives, having a single mom living in the middle of nowhere, like literally the middle of nowhere. There wasn't a school in the town we lived in. We went to high school in the next town over, middle school. They had to take buses over there. We grew up literally in the middle of 2 cornfields on an 80-acre sod farm. My brother was the sweetest little asshole that we ever knew. He really had a really good heart, and obviously I was his older sister, so I could get him to do all kinds of fun things for me. Like I would lay in bed at night. We lived in a single wide trailer, and my room was at one end and his was at the other, and I would yell like, hey, come here, I gotta tell you something super important. And he'd be like, you're not again. I'm like, no, I'm serious this time. And I'd be like, can you turn off my light? Because my light wasn't in my room. And he would do it like 3 times a week. I could convince him to do that. He was always looking out for my mom. He thought that he was the man of the house from a really young age. Like he thought that he needed to take care of everybody and that we were all his responsibility. Him and I were really close. We were like basically the exact same person. We were 3 years apart, always together, and a lot of our childhood was a little tumultuous. Like my parents had kids really young. I think my mom was 20 and my dad was 21 when we were born, and they were typical Midwestern, pretty poor, probably shouldn't have gotten married at such a young age. And my dad had a, typical blue collar, drink a lot of beer after work. My mom worked in a factory. He was in a union. And so it was kind of just like the two of us together a lot out in the country where we were living. There wasn't a lot of things to do other than make your own like activities. So I remember one time like looking across the street, I just happened to walk outside and I see the neighbors laughing while my brother was rolling on the ground. Like, oh, he definitely did pee on the electric fence. They convinced him to do that. And it definitely comes back. The electricity definitely comes back in your body. So we were always doing like stupid things. We had a lake in our backyard. It was a private lake just in the middle of a natural lake back there. We'd do a lot of fishing, ice fishing, those kind of things occupied our time. There was a neighbor, this crazy old guy lived on the corner and he had a peach farm and he sold his peaches. And we thought it was a good time to maybe steal all these peaches one time. Like we're gonna go and we're gonna steal peaches. And this guy decides it's a good time to like open fire on us with a birdshot and a shotgun. And so we were like hiding behind a berm and another neighbor came out and was like, hey, you can't kill the children. Like that's not acceptable. And just, with no parental supervision, it was like the 80s, early 90s. We were just out there willy-nilly doing whatever, we would have to be home when it got dark. And then when he was in high school, I remember one time specifically, so he was in middle school and I was in high school, and someone got on the bus and was like, hey, your brother's down at the middle school, like buying a bag of weed. And I'm like, wait, what? And they're like, yeah, a guy walked down from the high school. He's down there selling weed. And he was a kid, like he didn't know anything about marijuana. So I got off the bus, walked to the middle school. I'm like trying to fight kids, just to like try to keep my little brother safe from this like marijuana. I thought that, that wasn't something he needed to be getting into. Like he thought he was everyone's protector. So he was kind of like, he would look out for the underdog. And I remember one time there was a high school football game and everyone was making fun of somebody and he's standing there like with all the cool kids. They're making fun of him and my brother's saying nothing. And then he just kind of calls the guys out and they're like, wait, what? And then he just got in a giant fight. There was just a huge fight. He ended up beating up like 4 people. The sheriff ended up coming out and talking about it. And it was funny because the sheriff remembered, and like at his funeral, he was telling this story like, I didn't want to arrest this kid, but you can't go around just fighting people. Just like that kind of encompasses who he was. Like he didn't take any shit, but he was the nicest person ever. I had moved out of our parents' house when I was 16, and my brother and some of his buddies, there was a again, out in the middle of nowhere, there was a new construction house, and so they had left all the equipment out there. And so him and his buddy Matt were like, oh, look at all this equipment's out here. And so my brother was like, oh, I know how to start that. Got in, started up this, I think it was a crane or a bulldozer. And then Matt ended up getting in it and just knocking half the house down. And then they left, and they got caught, like, very easily. They got caught and had to go through the court system for, like, demolishing a house, and the builder had to talk to my parents, and I think a lawsuit might have been involved, because obviously that's not it's not really what you're supposed to do. And he insisted. I thought I was just starting the equipment. I didn't know the house was gonna get knocked down, or partially knocked down, like it was just the framework of the house. We looked a lot alike, and he was younger than me by 3 years. So I remember being 16 and talking to this girl who was 18, and she's like, oh, I'm your brother's girlfriend. And he's 13. I'm like, excuse me? Like, no, you're not, actually. And she's like talking to me. She's like, oh yeah, we've been dating for a while. They met at the Fallujah fair. It's like this big county fair where we're from. And I'm like, do you know how old he is? And she's like, yeah, he's 18. And I'm like, he is absolutely 13. Like 100% he's 13. And she's just like, wait, what? And then he was so mad at me. He's like, I told her we were twins and we were both 18. And I was like, that does not justify this. And then another time, he was dating some girl. I don't think I had a driver's license, so it had to be before then. I was 15, and he's like, hey, can you go get this girl I'm dating? It was like 30 minutes away in a different town. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So she was like 16, and we stole my mom's car, like, in the night, right? So we just go out there. She was always working a lot, you know, being a single mom. So we took her car, drove it to Brighton, picked up this random girl who had like the worst smoker's voice. Like, I was like, what are we doing here, dude? And ended up picking up this girl and bringing her back to my house, and then convinced my mom, when she woke up and some random girls there somehow, we convinced her not only did her friends bring her over and drop her off, but they siphoned the gas out of her car while they were there. We're like, yeah, we don't know what happened. And she somehow, I don't know if she believed us or wanted to believe us, but she bought the story, supposedly. There was always something stupid. One time, I was 18, and at the time you could legally buy cigarettes when you're 18, and he was 15, and we were with some guy I was dating who was kind of a jerk. So like, we were arguing, and we pulled over to go to this gas station to buy cigarettes. And I went in to buy cigarettes for this guy I'm dating, and I'm like, oh, I need this, cigarettes, whatever. And they're like, do you have ID? I'm just like, what the? No. I had to go out to the car. I'm out there getting ID. My brother, who's 15, walks out with a pack of cigarettes. And I'm like, what in the heck just happened here? And he's like, what? I bought some cigarettes. Not only did he buy the cigarettes, he said that it was the wrong Camel Cash and they were old, and he went in and exchanged them, came back out. And I just remember being so mad. Like, he always had that way about him. He could talk people into doing whatever kind of debauchery. He just had the way, like the look, like he's going to convince people to go along with his plans. We did steal my mom's car a lot. Like, she got electrocuted at one time. She was mowing the lawn, like a push mower mowing the lawn, and hit an electrical line and got electrocuted. Flew her through the yard, and she was electrocuted. And she had a hard time sleeping after that. So she would take some medication the doctor prescribed so she could sleep. And she would sleep all right, and we would just take her car in the night. And there was one time, like, I do not know how we survived childhood. Like, we were definitely having a good time. And we were out driving down the road, and I'm driving this Aerostar minivan, and like way too fast on a country road. It was a paved road, but I'm going like 90 miles per hour and hit like an undulation in the road. And then the car went off the road, and I would just whip the wheel like back, and then just like going panicking. And then I took my hands off the steering wheel and just screamed. And then one of his friends was with us, this kid named Parker, and he ended up jumping over the seat, grabbing the steering wheel and saying, you know, you have to stop this car. And then Mike was just laughing and laughing. It's pretty stupid, but we just did dumb, like I said, we did dumb stuff like that all the time. We'd race lawnmowers. There was a creek all the way around our house. And so we were racing lawnmowers like it was, we thought they were race mowers. I'm not sure. There was some crappy old lawnmowers my dad and grandpa had, like, we're going to fix up or something. So these lawnmowers are there. We're racing them. I obviously was not a good driver, and I drove it right into this ditch, like full of water. And then we were trying to pull him out. He ended up convincing one of his buddies to come over, like with a motorcycle, and attach a tow rope to it and pull it out, like before our parents got home and realized I had driven the lawn equipment into the creek. Another thing that like just kind of shows his character and who he was. One of our other close friends had died in a car accident. He was really young, like maybe 17 at the time. My brother drove by his parents' house. His dad was out putting a roof on his house. And my brother, he drove by, he was 17 and was just like, what the? Came home, told my mom, ended up calling up a bunch of buddies, and they all showed up over there like, we're putting a roof on this house, right? So there was just the group of local kids helping roof a house because that's who he was. I know one thing that I think is super funny. I had a really close girlfriend my whole life, right? So she was basically part of his life always. And he called her Beluga, meaning beluga whale. And she would call my house and he'd be like, Beluga's on the phone. And I'm telling you, it was years later after he died, like 10 years later, she called me and she was like, did you know a beluga is a whale? And I was like, I did indeed. I was very aware of that. But we would hang out at my grandmother's house a lot. My mom would be working, and in the summer we'd just get dropped off over there. She lived in a trailer park, and it's just like kids roaming around. And one time, so my girlfriend Jennifer and I were walking around, and we walked around a corner and we see these two dudes just fighting, right? Like just full on rolling down a hill, hitting each other. And she's like, that's your brother. And I'm like, wait, what? And then I'm like yelling, like, what are you guys doing? But yeah, it was definitely my brother and another kid, just full on rolling down a hill, punching each other. And it was funny in my head, like walking up on this, like, what are these idiots doing? Oh no, that's my brother. Him and that same kid used to fight all the time. It was just like basically some kind of pissing match, really. I don't know what that particular fight was about, but they'd gotten in numerous fights like over the years, and then they were buddies, and then they would fight. That's like the biggest. Like Mike and I he was me, like to the core, except for that kid could not hold a grudge. Like I will hold a grudge till I die. Like in second grade, you took my pencil. No, he would like never hold it. Like you could punch him in the face, and then 3 minutes later, he'd be like, all right, we're gonna go get some food. When we were in high school, he was always just running his mouth, talking shit, and then laughing, right? He had like this smile that everyone like, you couldn't like say no to him, and you loved him immediately after he did this like smirk that he had. As soon as he was in high school with me, I was in 11th grade and he was a freshman, there would be like the whole school thought I could beat people up. I've been in fights with like my brothers out in the country and like neighborhood boys and stuff, but never with a girl in my school. And the whole school was afraid of me because my brother had convinced them all that I was going to beat these girls up that he would like talk smack to. And he'd be like, oh, my sister is gonna, and I'm just like, dude, I don't. And then one time I was in class, it was English class, minding my own business, just hanging out in class, and he knocks on the door and he's like, you need to come out here. And the teacher's like, what is going on? And he's like, it's an emergency, I need my sister. So I go out of the class and he's like, I called so-and-so, I don't remember this girl's name. He called some girl a name and she hit him, and like something inside of me snapped. So I'm like in the hallway and she's like, he called me a bitch. And I'm like, well, are you a bitch? Like, you can't touch him, right? And then it was just super funny. And he's just sitting there, like, I'm screaming at this girl and we're gonna fight. And then he's in the corner, like, remember looking at him, and he's just like, yep, my plan worked out perfectly. I still hate her, for the record. Like, I literally still hate this girl. And they hung out all kinds of times after that. Like, there's million, like, pictures from later in high school. They're at parties together. And I'm still like, oh, so stupid. What inspired my brother to join the military is a kind of a complex thing. So again, we were real poor, grew up in the country back when you had VCR tapes and we didn't have cable. So we had like 3 movies at our house. One of them happened to be Hamburger Hill, childhood classic. And he watched that movie all the time when he was like 10. And he kind of thought to himself, you know what I really want to do? I want to hump hills and kill people. And he kind of was like, that looks like it might be a good life. And in the least psychopathic way, he had this ideal that fighting for something bigger than yourself was an important thing. When he watched that movie, he thought that that was something like bigger than patriotism. It was very noble to fight for your country. And he kind of just had always had some congruency with something bigger than himself. And then my grandfather was in the Navy and my uncle was in the Navy. He made it a career. He ended up retiring as a master chief in the Navy. And my brother was talking to my Uncle Rick and my grandpa and my dad and just thinking like, I don't, what am I going to do? And he ended up enlisting in the Marines because he said their uniforms were much better looking than the Navy uniforms. And he just was like, that is congruent with what he wanted to do with going into battle and just being a grunt. That was just exactly what he wanted to do. He was an 0311, a rifleman, and he scored really high on the ASVAB, and everyone was like, you got to do something else. And he was like, nope, like this is 100% what I want to do. He just really wanted to get dirty. At the time when my brother joined the Marine Corps, for us, it was more like a patriotic thing. It was pre-9/11. There wasn't like any wars that had happened within my lifetime. I thought, oh, that's going to be really cool, super patriotic, something for him to do, get out of the small town we live in. I'm sure my mom was scared. I know he wanted to enlist before he was 18, and she refused to sign the paperwork and forbid my dad from doing so as well. Not speaking for my mother, but I know that she was more a little hesitant for him to maybe to leave her. I'm not sure. She was a little hesitant for him to join the military. Whereupon I had lived on my own for a while, and I just kind of thought, oh yeah, that's something really cool to do. When my brother was in boot camp, for me, it was hard because I was used to being able to call him whenever I wanted, and it was the first time that I realized like, oh, this isn't the same as moving out of town. He joined in January '01. So when Michael was in boot camp, we did communicate via mail. It wasn't as immediate as I would have liked. So he did write a lot of letters and ask for things and told us, what was going on and how funny he thought it was. I know at one point he was kind of a troublemaker, so he had to roll in sand and then go to bed. That was just like one of the stories that he had written in his letters. And he was always asking us like, send me nudie magazines because like you get points for this or something like that. And he wanted specific things to be sent, specific food items and girly magazines. This is high on the list. I'm trying to remember. I was pregnant at the time when he had enlisted. I was engaged with my brother and what he was doing, and we were writing letters back and forth and all that, but it was also a different time in my life where I was just preparing to be a mom. I did not go to his graduation. So I believe his boot camp graduation was in April, and my parents and my grandma kind of caravaned down, and I didn't go because I was really, really pregnant. I got married in May of 2001, and so he ended up coming back for my wedding, which was really cool that he was out of boot camp and he was able to come and, be a part of my wedding. I know one time when he was in boot camp, one of his buddies told me this story so my brother was like talking mad shit to everybody. This particular guy had some cookies that his grandma made him, and he was super excited about these cookies. People in their family would mail them items that they requested, and at the end of the week, they would be able to have these items. Well, this guy was waiting for these cookies all week, and my brother did something. I have no idea what it is. And instead of giving out the cookies, the drill instructors took all the items out of this locked cabinet and smashed them all on the ground and said, you can thank Mike for that. Like, he's still pissed about it. So after he was in infantry school, he really wanted to buy a car. And he came home, he was like, I'm not gonna be one of those guys, I'm gonna buy a car like in my home state, I'm gonna have, my parents help me, I'm just gonna make sure that this happens. So he was home looking for cars with my mom, and I ended up going into labor. And so I called my mom and I was like, hey, I'm gonna have a baby, you need to come to the hospital. And he was like, can we do this another day? Like, I have something to do. We're trying to buy a car here and your baby's not due for another 6 weeks. And he was just like, but then he got there and I have this picture. It was like, he was like the nervous one. Him and I would like beat the crap out of each other, but he never wanted anyone else to hurt me or never wanted to see me in pain. So I'm at the hospital, obviously it's a whole birth. And he was pacing the hallway, just like worried about me and just trying to figure out like what to do. Obviously he was in the hallway, but he would stick his head in and be like, are you good? And then just keep pacing the hallway. And I just have this picture like immediately after my daughter was born, and I was holding my daughter and he's just looking at her like it was the greatest thing he'd ever seen. I was his first niece, and it was really funny because when he was in California, he was stationed at Pendleton and we lived in Michigan, and he would just buy her the most extravagant gifts, like whole outfits with like fur, and just like he'd be like, oh, this girl needs California style. And one time he brought home a giant teddy bear for Christmas. I think it was maybe her second Christmas, and he just like couldn't fit it in his stuff, so he had to sit on the airplane with a giant teddy bear he was bringing back for his niece, which is just like this burly Marine with a teddy bear on his lap. That's really cute. So when he was stationed at his unit, he immediately was at Camp Pendleton with 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines. And he didn't really talk a lot about that. He was learning a lot of things while he was out there. He would call me and drill me on how many people are in a battalion, how many people are in a rifle team. Like, he wanted to make sure that I knew all of these things so that we could have conversations, and he would be able to talk to me without me having to stop him and ask questions. He was super adamant on all of that. So I knew he was learning a lot of things, and I think a little bit when you're learning things and then you're teaching somebody else, it helps you retain the information. And so he really just talked a lot about cleaning rooms, room inspections, formations, not a lot about, it was pre 9/11, so there wasn't a lot of communication other than a lot of training and then him, hanging out in Oceanside with his buddies. So I remember, like, on 9/11, I was a new mom, and I'm in Michigan, so I'm in the East Coast time, and it was like, I was watching the Twin Towers fall and thinking, this is super messed up. And then somehow in the middle of that, it dawned on me, like, oh my God, my brother's a Marine and there's going to be a war and he's going to have to fight it. So I just started calling him, like repeatedly calling him, and nobody's answering because it's still super early in California. And I was just adamant that I needed to get a hold of my brother. And he ended up picking up his phone and saying, I gotta go, we're going to formation. And, and I was immediately I was very worried for him and his safety. And then after that, the tone of what they were doing in the Marine Corps kind of changed. It went for like, me and my buddies are hanging out, shooting some guns, getting yelled at for cleaning things, to we are getting ready for a war. He was always excited, just bravado. When they were talking about going to war, like, it was something that they looked forward to before he had gone to war. And he was on a MEU, they did that, and someone ended up dying. And so I think things just kind of changed after that. When you realize that death is real and it's not like it is in a movie and it's someone that's not going to be around anymore, I think things just change for your mental stability. Also, his unit was involved in a training incident. They were just training without weapons at the Fallujah Islands. So they were there just training, and then there were some guys that just rolled up, and Antonio Sled was killed that day. My mom and I were really actively involved in, they used to have Marine moms, and so we would talk to the other parents on there. I was a sister, but I was always up in my brother's business. So we knew that lady, the mother, we knew his mother, and, we had relationships with people. And then everything changed after that instance for my brother, both when he came home and kind of sat me down and was and that's when I knew, he's not just out there messing around, this is real. And that was a huge turning point in his personal and professional career as far as a Marine. He wasn't there. He was doing chow hall duty or something like that. He wasn't at the incident, but people were just playing stickball, and some insurgents opened fire on them. And people were hiding, they didn't have any ammunition. They had weapons, but they didn't have any live ammo. So they couldn't do anything about it. Then somebody got ammo. They, ended up taking these guys out, and that really affected my brother. He came home, and he came over, and he was gonna have dinner at my house, and I was pregnant with my second child at this time. And he looked at me and he was like, hey, I need to talk to you about some stuff. And I was like, listen, I'm not into I don't need to hear about any of this stuff. I'm a mom. I have, I'm raising a daughter. I don't want to hear about any of this stuff. And I will never forget this moment in my life. He grabbed me by my arms and looked at me, and he said, I need someone to tell this to. Everybody needs somebody to confess to. And I was just like, oh, all right. So we got in the car, because it's a lot of times if you get in the car, it's easy to have a conversation because it's not staring somebody in the eyes. You're driving, maybe some music's on, and he's just talking, telling me some things, how he felt and how angry he was. One of his good friends was killed in that incident, and he was so upset about it. And I think a little bit he maybe blamed himself because he wasn't there. And he just kind of, I think in the military, they knew who they were sending into Iraq, with the initial push, because those guys were pissed. Because I could convince myself, oh, he's playing Marines, him and a bunch of hot guys, you know what I mean? You didn't think, these are a bunch of babies out there and they could really get hurt. That incident has always stuck out to me because it was such a big deal for him. And just I watched my little brother go from my little brother to a grown man based on that incident, and the look in his face, and just this, there's something behind his eyes that wasn't there before that he was going to have to carry with him. They were getting ready to go into Iraq for the first time, in 2003, and that, I didn't talk to him a lot during that. He was really focused on working and just getting ready to go there. And then like, my brother was a really good in the field Marine and a very bad garrison Marine. Like all the things you could mess up doing, he was that guy, right? Like he was a little on the sloppy side, but in the field or during deployments, he was a badass. And so he was getting ready, doing everything he should do, and then on his downtime, just kind of really having downtime. I know one time he got caught driving drunk on base. They knew like, all right, this is a good dude, so we don't want to do anything to him, but he still needs to get in trouble. So this kid had to stand like at the corner with a sign that said, "This could be you, don't drink and drive," right? Like in uniform. They punished him, but they didn't want to take him away from his guys. We would talk when he was getting ready to go to the first invasion of Iraq. We would talk, but it was still like pre-war for me. So it was, you still had a house phone back then. So he would call my house phone at specific times and I would talk to him on my house phone. Like he'd be like, "Oh, I'll call on Thursdays," or sometimes he'd call me like drunk someplace, like, "You need to come and get me." Like, "Bro, you're in California." And he's like, "I'm just so drunk, someone needs to come and get me." Yeah, it's not gonna be me because I'm 2,000 miles away. And he'd just be like, "Fuck," right? Like, and then, like that happened on more than one occasion. So we would communicate when he was out having a good time. And then we didn't talk a lot about, I think he was trying to like have two different personalities, right? Like he was the work Hanks and then he was my brother. And I think he was trying to protect me a little bit from the things that he knew he didn't want me to worry. When he went to Iraq the first time, yeah, he communicated. They weren't there very long. And that was when everything was on the news, right? So we were all like watching the news nonstop. I had CNN on in one room and then MSNBC on in the other, and there's 24/7 news coverage. Like he was on a ship, they rolled in, and then they invaded into Iraq, right? He was on a big carrier, and you could watch it, like you could see it right on the news, like, "Oh, that's the ship my brother's on." And then he would communicate, like whenever it was like his time to call, he would call and either talk to me or he would call my parents and talk to them. And then we'd just, "Oh, I was the one to talk to Mike this week." And we would just, tell each other whatever was going on. He did email a lot from the ship. He talked a little bit about that experience when they initially invaded Iraq. He was kind of on a high when he came home from that, right? Like we went in there, we kicked some ass, and it was all great stuff. Initially, he didn't talk a lot about the things that had happened in Iraq. After a few months, I think, of coming home and just the adrenaline wears off and you have to sit with your own thoughts, that's when him and I would, he'd be like, "Listen, it's time for me to tell you some stories you don't want to hear." And he did tell me some stories I definitely probably didn't want to hear, but he often told me that he needed somebody to tell his stories to, and it was going to be me. And so we did have a lot of in-depth conversations. So there's a lot of very heroic things that went on, and there was a lot of things that he saw. It's hard to rationalize in my mind, like this super big, tough Marine, and then you see, military-age men getting killed, and that sometimes means 15. They don't always look like men. So a lot of the stories that he was actively involved in a lot of hand-to-hand combat, like Mike did tell me a lot of things about what happened in combat and how it made him feel and how he was wrestling with some of those complex ideas. Like, you're trained to go to war, you're trained to kill other men, but then when it actually comes down to it, he was really concerned about training, making sure that the guys underneath him were trained enough. I know going into Iraq, the second time when he went into Iraq, he re-enlisted while he was over there. And I was this is the last time we talked. I was very upset. I'm like, "Dude, you're going to be a 4-year Marine. What are you doing? Like, you need to come home." And it was in the middle of the second invasion of Fallujah. They're getting ready to go into Fallujah. And I'm like, "You just need to come home. Like, you don't have to do that. That's someone else's job." And it is not someone else's job. These are my Marines. These are young guys I need to take care of. They've never seen combat before. And he really wanted to make sure that these guys were taken care of and that he brought everybody home. Unfortunately, that's not at all what happened. When he was quiet, he was always wrestling with something. So he would start telling me about things, and then he would kind of like rear back. Like if it was a funny story, I'm gonna hear all about it. And some of the things were super gory from a civilian point of view, but still maybe funny, right? So then we would laugh about that, or he would laugh about it. Why I'm like, so we would talk a lot about things. But I think he definitely wrestled with the idea of the difference between talking about killing somebody and thinking that you're there for a reason, and the actual impact that taking another human life has on you. He never said to me, "Hey, I'm drinking a lot more," but he was calling me on the weekends and he was, sloppy drunk. obviously he thought I could come pick him up, and I was in Michigan, and he was just kind of going through some things, but he threw himself into like, what could he do to help? He can train more. He can, you know, train the Marines underneath him more. Like that was what kind of his thought process. Like that's how he was working through his stuff, is like, the only way I can get to the next level is getting through this. I need to make sure that we're all prepared, because they knew they were going back. I mean, he went into the Marine Corps, he was 18, he was like my baby brother, he was like this little fat kid, and he came out of boot camp, you know, like more of like a chiseled man. But as he continued to go to combat and experience different experiences, it was like he went from just having like this laugh behind his eyes all the time to having more of a stoic expression. You could definitely tell that when he was telling me something, he was thinking about how he could say it. Sometimes I need to be able to say this in a way that allows, he would always make sure that I fully understood like the depths of his emotion. And what he was saying wasn't always as important as just like, he would come home and tell me things. He'd be like, all right, I got things I got to tell you, but we're not talking about this on the phone. So sometimes he would keep things, and then we would, you know, just go out, hang out, and then after he would confess, he would tell me all the things that he needed to say, or he would talk about war. And I remember he went from, we're getting ready to go into Iraq the first time, and it was a game. It was a game to him even, like we're gonna kill the Hajis, like we're gonna go in there, we're gonna do all this stuff. And it wasn't a game anymore. It wasn't something to laugh about, it wasn't something to joke about. People die. And he took that very seriously. And his demeanor as far as when he went in and we're gonna go get some bad guys, to we might get killed, or my men might get killed, it was a complete different, almost a different personality when talking about war. So when he was in Iraq in 2004, he came home, we hung out. I ended up coming out to California right before they deployed, just meeting his friends, hanging out with him at his apartment, you know, just kind of going to the military base. We were really close, and then he was getting ready to go back. And I know his biggest concern going back was making sure the guys that were with him were well trained. He would talk about that all the time, that these are boots, they're not ready. And he was very concerned. I'm sure they were ready, but he saw them like, you know, he felt responsible for the men on his fire team. The last time we really talked, we got into an argument. He was super funny, right? So he would send home, like he communicated a lot, especially via email, when he was in Iraq in 2004. He sent home with pictures, like him and all of his gear, and it said, damn, I look good. Like, you know, just he was always funny about stuff like that. Or my birthday's October 1st, and his is October 7th. And I sent him an email like, happy birthday. And he emailed me back like, oh yeah, it was a great time. Like drinking piss in the warm desert, you know, like just, you know, trying to be funny and keep it light, but still like, this sucks. I don't remember exactly when he decided to re-enlist, but it was in country, and he was always, for a while before he made the choice to re-enlist, he was wrestling with that idea. And I was giving him my viewpoint as his older sister who just wanted her brother to come home. And he was telling me, like, I'm responsible for these people, I need to be here, and basically this is my decision, stay out of it. And he had already made his decision and ended up re-enlisting. And then shortly after that, I believe they did the push into Fallujah. So we talked to him sporadically. He was dating a friend of mine at the time, actually, Shelly, and she would talk to him a little bit more. When he had his downtime, he was looking for, like, not his older sister, you know, that wasn't the conversation he wanted to have. Like, I was worried about him. So he would call us and we'd talk on the phone. He did email a lot while he was deployed, but right before the initial push into Fallujah, he would call, like, it was like every Thursday for some reason. I just remember, I don't know if they had like special phone time, and I know a couple of times he had borrowed a satellite phone and had called home, and he had, like, I know he had talked to Shelly because she's like, oh yeah, your brother ended up calling me. And so we did hear like, hey, things are gonna get bad. You might hear about it on the news. Like, we're getting ready to push into Fallujah. And at the time, you know, it was all over the news. So everyone knew they were going into Fallujah for weeks in advance. The last conversation I had with Michael on the phone, I was taking my daughter to get her ears pierced. I was like sitting in the mall, in the outlet mall parking lot, and he was like, oh, you know, like, tell her I love her, like, that's gonna be cool, she's gonna get her ears pierced. He would try to call me, my mom, and his girlfriend, so he only had so much phone time. So the last time I talked to him, I was telling him I was taking my daughter to get her ears pierced, and that was the last time I talked to him on the phone. The last time I talked to him at all was via email, and it was an argument about him re-enlisting. The last time I saw him in person, so that was when he still had CDs, right? So he came home to Michigan on pre-deployment leave, and we were at the bar together. So we're hanging out at a local bar in the town that we live in, and he had a CD he had just bought So he had bought the CD right before he left California, and he forgot to bring it home, back to Michigan. And so he went and bought another one. And then we were at the bar, we were hanging out. We're super close. My whole family, but we're not huggy people, right? Like, I'm not a hugger. I'll be like, high five. And I remember, so I called him. He was in my mom's car in front of me. And I was like, hey, you don't need 2 of those CDs. Why don't you give me that one? And he's like, all right, shit. I pulled over behind him. And for a moment, like, I saw him and he was standing in between my car and my mom's. And I thought, maybe if I just give him a little whack, like, then I'll break his leg and he won't have to go to Iraq, right? Like, I literally remember vividly thinking, I just... And then I was like, you know, he would never forgive me. Like, these thoughts are going through my head really quick. I was like, he would never forgive me. And then so I got out of the car, he gave me the CD, and he was like, and he gave me a big hug. I got back in my car, and that's the last time I ever saw him. The last time he ever saw my youngest brother is kind of funny. He was going to the airport with my dad, was taking him back to the Detroit Metro Airport to fly back to California. And he walked in my youngest brother's room, who was still in high school, and he woke him up. It was early morning, and he was like, hey, listen, I'm getting ready to go do some shit. And if I don't come back, whatever you do, don't pour your beer out for me. That's ghetto. You drink that shit. Like, I don't think I heard from him at all after they went into Fallujah. If I did, it was for a quick minute, like, hey, you know, I know they were at a train station for a little bit, and there was a time when he called people. And honestly, in my memory, I don't remember if he called. I don't think he called me. I think he called his girlfriend and my mom, and they just relayed, like, hey, we talked to Mike type situation. I know that it was, you know, like 9 days of just straight combat action while they were in Fallujah. And luckily, now I'm really good friends with a lot of the people that he served with, so I've heard pretty in-depth details of what happened leading up to and the day he died. In his particular fire team, there was a time when there was kind of like a lull, and they ran out of water, and someone had to walk back to the track to get water, and he thought he was taking care of his guys, like, hey, I got this, I'll go back and get water. Well, then they had gotten a call saying, hey, you got to go back and re-clear the houses that you guys just cleared. Well, Mike wasn't there. He was out getting water and didn't know what was happening, and 2 of the guys in his fire team ended up getting killed clearing that house. Even from looking at pictures, like, he was like, that broke him, and I could see it in his face. Like, just seeing, like, at first I was like, man, it must just be combat, but that had to break him. He thought he was helping his men, and he left them. And just knowing who he was and how he was with me, he would have had to deal with that for a really long time. And then on the day he died, they were clearing some houses again, and they saw somebody, like, kind of run through a courtyard. So this sergeant jumped over a wall, like a cement wall in the courtyard, and there was a guy that had, like, a whole cache of weapons, and he had started shooting, and my brother was doing, like, cover up against another wall, kind of like looking down. And so Sergeant Connor got hit, and he was like, damn it, I got hit, and looked over, and my brother ended up getting shot, like, right through the face by a sniper, probably that same guy in that window. And then he died. And then they, you know, kind of medvaced him and Connor out at the same time. When Mike died, my younger brother CJ was staying at my house. I was living in this rental house in Howell, Michigan. And it was super weird because in the morning, I had gotten up and my brother CJ was sleeping on my couch. So it was like the middle of the night, and I just sat up straight in my bed, and I could see the couch from where I was sleeping, and CJ got up and he looked right at me. Like, we made eye contact and both went back to sleep. And then I went about my day. Like, it was a normal day. I went to the store, and I remember exactly what I made my kids for dinner that night. Like, I don't remember what I ate last week. I remember that day. I remember every minute of that day. I was living in a rental house, and this was like, cell phones weren't good like they are now, right? Like, it was an old school flip phone, and I had a house phone. And so my house phone kept ringing and ringing and ringing. It was nighttime, so I put my kids to bed. I read a story. It's called Bear Wants More. Put the kids to bed. They were 1 and 3. Tucked them in, ended up falling asleep reading the story to my daughter. And then I kept hearing the phone ring, like, repeatedly. And then I had voicemail on my cell phone. But to check my voicemail, I needed to drive around the block. And so my brother was there, so I left the house to drive around the block to listen to this voicemail. And I had 3 voicemails, and I listened to them one at a time. One of them was a buddy of mine, and I called him back, joked around with my buddy, turned around one street. The next voicemail was my ex-husband. He was saying, hey, Melissa, I heard something about your brother. I don't know if it's true or not, but I need you to call me. My mom had preemptively called him to come and get the kids. And unbeknownst to me, she was on her way to my house in a government white van with 3 Marines and a Navy chaplain. I called my ex-husband, and I said, hey, what are you talking about? Like, tell me what happened. And he's like, I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know what's going on. Like, I heard about your brother. And I was like, just fucking tell me. He said, Melissa, your brother's dead. And I turned the next corner. My aunt was calling me, my dad's sister. She never called me. So I picked up the phone and I said, tell me it's not true, Michelle. Tell me it's not true. And she said, Melissa, where are you? I said, I'm driving around the block. She said, you need to come home right now. And I remember thinking, turn the next corner. If I don't go home, this isn't real. If I don't pull in that driveway, this isn't real. And I drove up to the house and there was a white van, just like in the movies, standing there, and there was three Marines and a Navy chaplain and my parents standing in the yard. I don't remember turning the car off. It had just recently rained and it was muddy outside. And I fell out of the car into the mud and screamed and screamed and screamed until I couldn't scream anymore. And my dad picked me up off the ground and was just hugging me. And my brother ran by me and CJ ran by me and just ran down the road, and I didn't know what to do. I chased him. And we were just like, what the hell just happened here? When I went back in the house, and there's a casualty assistance officer there, who was a really amazing person, and he said, how much do you want to know? And I said, I want to know everything. And I had like candles and stuff on my kitchen table, and I remember throwing it all on the floor. And he got a map out and was like, this is where your brother was killed. This is what time it was. And it was like, that's crazy, because as soon as he told me the time, it was just about the same time that my other brother and I had like looked at each other in the night. And I still think it's super crazy that I went an entire day without knowing he was dead. Like, we were so connected. I thought, how in the heck can I live an entire day without knowing that he's not here anymore? And it always bothered me. Like, I thought I should have felt him leave. And then after getting notified that he died, it was more about, okay, like, who else do we need to call? We grew up, like I said, in a really small town. So basically, my ex-husband showed up, took my kids, took them to his house, and then I just kind of went to the local bar, because everyone was starting, you make one phone call and half the town showed up at the bar at 9 o'clock at night. And we were just all like making plans. Then we all showed up at my parents' house the next day, and that casualty assistance officer was still there, like listening to stories, helping everyone plan. Then it was planning mode, right? Like, we need to plan the funeral. We need to, figure out who's gonna come home. And my uncle was still active duty at the time, so he escorted my brother's body home from Dover to the Detroit Metro Airport, which that was just a really powerful thing as well. I'm sure that was really hard for him to do that. And a couple of his friends flew in from out of town, Marines that he had served with that weren't deployed for whatever reason. They flew in, and then I took him to a strip club, and then we all went to his funeral hungover. For me, I have a hard time remembering his funeral. It was a really emotional day, and I remember it was November, and it was right before Thanksgiving, and it was really dreary. It was like a rainy, dull Michigan day. Like the leaves had already passed like peak fall colors, and everything was brown and gray. And his funeral was held at a church in Brighton, and because it needed to be at a big location. I remember my dad talking. I remember the pastor giving a speech, and part of what he was saying was he read a verse out of the Bible where he was talking about Jesus saying, like, I asked you for food and you didn't feed me. I came to your house and you didn't clothe me. And the people were like, when did we do that? And Jesus said, whatever you do to the least of my people, you do to me. And I didn't really understand how much that tied into like my brother's life at the time. But it was really powerful, because he was the guy that would really give you the shirt off his back. He was always like sticking up for the underdog, and he would not take any shit, but he wouldn't watch anyone else get handed shit either. I remember silly things, I guess, like somebody took a picture of his casket with a flag on it being taken down the aisle, and like a journalist won an award for that picture. And I remember thinking, like, that's my whole life in that casket, and you're winning an award. It was like, it kind of bothered me a little bit. Just like, that's not, I don't know. I mean, it was a good picture, and it was on the front page of the local newspaper, but I just remember thinking, like, that's not award worthy, right? And before his funeral, there was like 3 days of visitations and a lot of like pretty prominent people came out. A lot of politicians came out to his funeral, the sheriff, you know, people that we went to high school with, and that's all kind of a blur too. Like, I really remember my dad, I was 25 when Michael died, and my dad wouldn't let me see him, and I really wanted to. And I thought if I could even just like see his hands, right, like then I would know for sure. And so I'm a little bit embarrassed about this, but there was a Marine, and they guard you nonstop. So there's a guy in there, and he's standing there, and I was like, you need to leave. I need to have some time alone with my brother. And he said, this is my job. We guard our Marines. And I looked at this guy and I said, you didn't do a very good fucking job. He looked at me and walked out, and I was trying to open the casket, but my dad kind of knew maybe I would do something like that and had it locked, because I just wanted to see him, and I wasn't given the opportunity. At a later time, I did see the autopsy pictures. Again, I thought if he wasn't here anymore, I would know. Like, he was such a big force in my life. I thought, like, how do you not feel that he's gone? And I wanted to make sure that it was real. After my brother died, I kind of realized, like, I could go one of two ways. Like, I can throw myself into the depths of grief and never get out of it. I could live there. And I decided that wasn't honoring his life and how he lived. A thing that a lot of people don't think about is after your loved one in the military dies, it's not just their death. There's a whole, like, you're getting ready for deployments. You're part of a military life, and then that is also taken away. Like, all of a sudden, you're not part of that anymore. That's gone. And I was like, I wanted to make sure that I did the things that he couldn't. So I just reached out to all of the people that I had connections to. The guy that was shot the day he died, he's amazing. He ended up calling me from Germany, found my phone number on the internet, and ended up calling me saying, hey, I was there when your brother died. I need to tell you my story. And that was, you know, powerful. And him and I became close friends. The shirt that I'm wearing today, so a few years after he died, you know, on the anniversary of Mike's death every year, we're like, oh, we're in a crappy place. And one year he was just like, you know what, why don't we make this day a celebration? And we're going to celebrate that he lived. And I was like, I think it was 2010. I'm like, I'm in. Like, this is a great idea. So every year since then, we call it Mike Hanks Day, and we, you know, talk about him, and everyone, like, we make shirts. And it started like old school, like, here's a shirt, and I took a marker and wrote like Mike Hanks Day on it. We'd have pictures posted all over the place. And I just became really close to a lot of those guys, and I just kept showing up. And I always heard in the back of my head my brother saying, everyone needs someone to confess to. And I didn't want anyone to carry anything with them. Like, a lot of people carry guilt, like, or they think like he's a hero because he died. And maybe the other Marines are less than because they didn't. And I have a really big problem with that. He's a hero for things he did while he was alive. He just happened to die one day. Like, that's not his story. He did, like, he received the Silver Star. He did a lot of, like, great things in the military. And the more I hear about him from the people he served with, I thought that my relationship with him was so unique, but he was like that to everyone. Like, he was just like the brother. I've heard a lot of stories about him and how he saved people. Like, there was a particular guy that called me and said, hey, your brother saved my life. Like, if you ever need anything, as long as you live, I'm only alive because your brother saved me in Fallujah. And I loved him because he did that, right? Like, that's awesome. And then he stepped out an IED in Afghanistan in 2007 and died. And it crushed me in ways I can't explain, because I thought, like, I'll get to watch his kids grow up and do that. So, but the day that he got the Silver Star, I don't know exactly what happened. There was an incident. He put himself in the line of enemy fire, ran out and pulled people back. And I'm not, like, there's two instances that happened that are similar. One was with Iraqi civilians, and one was with his brothers in arms. And I'm not sure what he actually got the Silver Star for. I've read the write-up several times. It just, like, it's hard for me to like picture that, you know, because I wasn't in Iraq. And I've heard so many different combat stories that they all blur together. Not so much that they blur together, but they're all significant to me. And he just happened to get the Silver Star for one of those things. After he was killed, I just kept showing up like, hello, I'm the sister you never wanted. And like they came back from Iraq, I was there. And then I would think, what would my brother want to do? So me and my mom and my aunt like took them all to Vegas. Like we're all going to Vegas, right? So there's somebody that he served with had a party so we could meet everybody in California, like Oceanside. And then all of us went to Vegas, like just had a great time, heard a lot of stories, like a lot of drinking was involved. But it was a really good experience, and I encourage people, combat veterans that I've talked to, are worried about talking to Gold Star families. Like maybe they feel like that somebody holds something against them, or that you're worried that I think you should not be here and my brother should. I'm so happy that everybody lived. And just the ability to have the connections with these people that lived with my brother and grew with him at a very important part of his life. That's so healing for me and my mom. I know that I just encourage more Gold Star families to get involved with talking to the people that their family member served with. And just if any combat member has any kind of stigma, like just reach out. Like there's so many great things that I learned. I'm the vice president of the 3rd Battalion 1st Marines Association, and they kind of bridge the gap with the old Marines, the new Marines across all generations, and the Gold Star families. And I'm very honored to be a part of that as a Gold Star family member. I was just invited to a change of command ceremony with the 3-1. And I met a guy who was a general, and he's like, I know Hanks, he's the heart and soul of this battalion. And it's just like great to hear those things later on. I mean, it's almost been 20 years and I still run into people and they're like, oh, I knew Hanks. And it's just like a really great thing, like to just know that he isn't forgotten and his name is still spoken. When they first got home from Iraq, when my brother didn't come home with them, I was on the phone with people, and they're passing the phone around, and they were on the beach. I think it was San Onofre. And I was, one of the higher up guys picked up the phone and he was like, this Hanks' sister? And I was like, yes. And he's like, can you handle this? And I said, if not me, then who? And he's like, that's not the question. Can you handle this? And I was like, I got this. And he's like, you're allowed to hang up the phone at any time. I was just so excited to like talk to everybody and like make sure they knew, like, I'm so happy you're home. That was really always important to me, to just make sure that I reached out to everybody and that they had my contact information. So if they needed to reach out, or if you like, I have a whole different experience. I have a whole different set of survivor's guilt. But if you want someone to be like sad with or shitty with, like I got you. Like I will always, be that person. I made it a priority of mine to do the things that my brother couldn't. So because he wasn't here and able to continue to do these things, I basically thought like he passed me the torch. He would want to make sure his guys were okay. That would be his priority. So that became my priority. And because of it, I have had the best experiences. Like I get to walk amongst giants of men on a regular basis. And I'm so thankful for that. I guess I want my brother to be remembered for who he was when he lived. A lot of people get a little wrapped up in that he was killed in action. He just happened to be the guy that day, but he lived. He was a great human and also an asshole. He did a lot of really good things, and he was human. Overall, he was human. Oh, he's a really good brother. I miss him every single day. And I think if he wanted to be remembered, he would want to be remembered for the fact that he lived, and he just did. All of the 22 years, he threw some stuff into those years. I would encourage any Gold Star family members to get, if they so choose, to be actively involved in the military community. It's helpful for myself and cathartic for a lot of the military members that I deal with, but it might seem scary or intimidating. I've been in places and I still walk into rooms where I don't believe that I earned a seat at the table, but the rewards that I get from those experiences and just being able to bring my brother back to life for a day, just hearing stories about him and, knowing things that I wouldn't know if I didn't have these connections and these relationships. That's very important for who I am as a person. And if they don't want to be actively involved, at least, maybe reach out and have some of these conversations, have some of these connections, and just be able to tell some stories and learn things that they didn't know. on a personal level, I think it's really important to be involved in like nonprofit organizations, and so many of them have branched out to do things for Gold Star families. The TAPS organization is one of my favorites. They are second to none, phenomenal for how they treat Gold Star family members. They have all kinds of programs, counseling, peer mentorships, where you can become actively involved with people in your same situation, whether it was a combat death or like a training death. They're second to none. And then there's some organizations such as the Warrior Reunion Foundation that brings combat veterans and Gold Star families back together just to be able to tell those stories and have those connections. I think that organizations and communities that do those things, I personally am so passionate about that, and I'm so thankful that organizations like that exist.